Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's about time to kick off. I just want to give a quick intro. On behalf of Quest Events, I'd like to welcome everyone to the inaugural Australian Mining Productivity and Competitiveness Summit. And on behalf of all the residents of the eastern states, I'd like to thank the people of Western Australia for the warm welcome and also for resisting the temptation to secede and allowing our economy to continue to steadily grow. In recent years, the Australian mining sector has seen a dramatic increase in costs and further pressure on profits caused by moderating commodity prices and moderating demand in key buying markets such as China. The emergence of lower cost competitiveness and uncertainty around local regulation and taxation systems has also created a number of challenges for the industry. This event is designed to answer those challenges, or at least address a pathway towards building a stronger Australian mining sector in the future and a more competitive industry as a whole. The event's been designed by a panel of experts who I personally greatly thank for all their input and the time they've taken out of their schedules, in particularly the conference chair, Ron Manners, the chairman of the Man West Group, Steve McDonald, the CEO of Skills DMC, Jonathan Forbes, the Director of Industry Development from South Australian Chamber of Mines and Energy, who's in the room today as well, and Professor Damien Gurko from the UTS. I'd also like to quickly thank our exhibitors, who you'll be able to see in the next room and meet over a coffee and a tea break, our Group International, and also on-call interpreters and translators. Our media partners, InfoMine, the National Resources View, and the resourceschannel.com.au, and also the help of SACOM and the Man West Group, the Mannkal Foundation, for helping us get the word out about the event. Ron's contribution to the Australian industry is marked by several awards, including being elected as a mining legend in the 2005 Excellence in Mining and Exploration Conference in Sydney, and joining an impressive group of individuals selected each year for their contributions to the sector. Ron has a broad range of interests, including the Mannkal Economic Foundation, property development, and from what I saw last night, an integral part of the Aussian community. And without further ado, I'd like everyone to give a warm welcome to Ron.
Thanks, Dylan, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I guess it was a long introduction, but it simply says that our family company's been going since 1895, which is 6 years before Australia had a flag or a constitution. So it explains why I've got a longer term view of the problems in Australia than perhaps just the political electoral cycle. When I got back from Melbourne on Saturday afternoon, I went straight to the home of Gary Gray, the recently appointed Resource Minister, who's a highly regarded political leader. And I asked Gary a couple of questions. I explained the rationale for this AMPAC conference for a start, and then I asked him if he was as concerned as I am about the seriously slipping productivity and competitiveness of our industry, and he is concerned. I asked him then what are, he's newly appointed of course, so what are his perhaps three priorities that he would that he intends to just get on with immediately. And he said without any hesitation, he said, number one, he said, we must get a major project up and running. He instanced the Roy Hill project. There are so many stalled projects, and these big projects are absolutely stalled in Australia, and particularly Western Australia at the moment. The costs to future generations of these projects being stalled is enormous. And we talk about sharing the benefits of the mining boom. It won't be a mining boom. Number two, he said he's dedicated to making the 457 visas work well and operate well. He understands that our industry cannot operate without these 457 visas. His third promise was that there would be no surprises during his term as Resource Minister, and I take that as good news because there's never a good surprise politically. And so that'd be great. Please come in here. That would be great news if we have no surprises and we can simply get on with the job. Now, I'm not sure if a chairman of a session has the right to have an opinion, but if I can claim just some small thoughts, these are some opinions that I think perhaps the three major sectors of Australia, which is government, unions and big business, I think they've all lost their way and all stepped way beyond what we could say the legitimate role that government should follow, that unions should follow, and that big business should follow. Governments at all levels, I think, have lost track. Government's role really is to protect the citizens' lives and properties against external invaders and local criminals, and run a legal system, dispute resolution and all those things. But apart from that, not many things. But the governments at all levels have allowed themselves to be suckered into losing sight of why they're there. And they launch out on all these vote-buying opportunities as they see them, and they get caught up in all this myriad of detail and the central things that they should be doing, they're not doing very well. I might mention just one instance of foreign aid, which is absolutely getting out of control. There are 1,500 public servants in Canberra. What are they doing in the foreign aid department? They're busily writing out cheques and thinking of more ways of spending your money. I don't know whether this is a legitimate role of government. And the bureaucrats have absolutely stepped aside from the responsibility of saying how much aid. They've left that to the United Nations to dictate what level of aid we should be burdening ourselves with. Now, everyone in this room knows that Australia is not paying its way at the moment because that's why we've got deficits. So we're in fact borrowing money from overseas to send it back again as foreign aid. So that's fine, it might be winning a few votes and getting us a seat on the Security Council of the United Nations, but future generations will not thank your generation and my generation when they come to have to pay that debt back. But these are long-term things that we've got to think outside. So that's my only comment about government, but don't get me started on government. I've got files and files of good intent versus long-term consequences, but that's for another day. But labour unions, I think similarly they've lost track of why they were originally set up. There are many truly economic functions that labour unions can perform, and that's why they were set up initially. Unions were set up as voluntary groups, organised to help their members by helping them increase their production and thereby their contributions to society. Their chief purpose was to raise the standards of workmanship and production. That would make them a force for good, for the general economic good of society as well as for their members. In a free and moral society, they would have continued on that path without resorting to compulsion, bullying and thuggery, which we see so often today. Many union initiatives have adversely affected our productivity and competitiveness. Many of those responsible for these actions have later on in their lives apologised for such restrictive legislation. For example, Clyde Cameron, the former Labor Minister responsible for introducing the holiday pay loadings, made a public statement in 1991, and I'll quote him. He said, "I am responsible for it, and I feel bloody stupid." but they're still there. They're an impediment to people opening at certain times. It's another cost burden, but many people would prefer to work in those holiday breaks. They don't need it just suits them. The flexibility left to themselves, people can work out their own arrangements pretty well. So, again, I think similarly big business has lost sight of the role in the community and they're as much problem as governments and labour unions. One of Australia's most respected investigative journalists, Robert Gottliebsen, in a series of articles that I recommend to people, a series of articles that he produced last December in his Business Spectator, freely available on the internet, he drilled very deeply into Australia's serious, productive and competitive crisis. Let me quote from his December 5th article, and these are his words. It's a long quote, so please settle back and pay attention. The title was "Miners Must Fess Up on IR Dirt." It's time for the chief executives of Chevron, his words, time for the chief executives of Chevron, BHP Billiton, Rio Tinto and all the major players in the Western Australian mineral resources construction boom to confess that their mistakes have been as responsible as the unions or the federal government for the productivity debacle which will mothball most future mine projects. Until the CEOs admit their mistakes, there can be no start on improving mine construction or productivity. When that happens, perhaps we can get the federal government and the unions to accept their share of the responsibility for the bad productivity, the consensus that Resources Minister at that time, Martin Ferguson, is trying to bring about. The most outspoken critic of Australian mining construction worker productivity is Chevron boss in Australia, Roy Kruswaniski, who says that Australian workers are 60% less productive than their US counterparts, which has contributed to big cost blowouts in a string of mining projects led by Chevron's giant Gorgon project, including its Wheatstone LNG plant near Onslow. But Kruswaniski did not take personal responsibility for his share of the cost blowout, although in fairness his mistakes have been no worse than most of the other mining CEOs. This week across my desk came a disastrous 30-page document, the April 2010 WA Chamber of Commerce and Industry Agreement titled Employee Relations Information for Contractors Working on the Wheatstone Project LNG plant. This document was issued to all Chevron's construction contractors, and it states that its purpose is to assist contractors in preparing their tenders in respect to employee relations issues and conditions of employment. In fairness to Chevron and Kruswaniski, most miners have either used WA Chamber of Commerce agreements or other agreements designed by consultants in the Western Australian Industrial Relations Club. Similar things have happened in Queensland. The agreements made it inevitable that productivity would slump and that costs would blow out. As I understand it, some miners used similar agreements during the Howard years and they would have then been illegal. The idea was that the agreements would prevent industrial disputes at times when the miners were exposed. Given the high level of construction activity and the government's industrial relations legislation, which gave enormous powers to the union, this at that time was a real risk. I can therefore understand the motivation, but the CEOs were signing a one-way ticket to a productivity disaster that would destroy the mineral construction boom. Chevron's Wheatstone document was issued to all construction contractors, and it states that its purpose is to, this is what it says, assist contractors in preparing their tenders in respect to employee relations issues and conditions of employment. The document contains wage rates, allowances, hours of work arrangements, including rest and meal breaks, penalty rates and shift loadings, mobilisation and demobilisation arrangements, redundancy and severance benefits, leave benefits, superannuation, income protection, cover details, protective clothing issues, and the rest and recreation leave cycle. In effect, the WA Chamber, acting on behalf of Chevron and Griswanowski, was instructing Chevron's prospective contractors every detail of the terms and conditions of employment which would apply to the Wheatstone project. Every contractor tendered for the project using identical labour cost and workplace assumptions as dictated by the client. No contractors were involved in the development and negotiation of these base terms and conditions. The end result was inevitable, a constant stream of concessions to the unions, rarely balanced by any productive concessions. If you want labour productivity anywhere in the world, the CEOs have to roll up their sleeves and get involved. They can't delegate such a vital task to chambers of commerce or industrial relations consultants. This is the polar opposite to the enterprise bargaining principles and practices that have characterised Australian industrial relations since the structural efficiency principle was handed down by the AIRC in the 1987 National Wage case. The Western Australian model ensures that the contractors do not have to compete or be innovative when it comes to industrial and employee relations, because there is no ability to do anything differently, which is how productivity is generated. Wheatstone and other projects became a simple cost-plus agreement. It's not going to be easy to wind all this back, as Ferguson is trying to do. We may have to wait until there's virtually no mining construction work in Western Australia. In the meantime, there can be no improvement until CEOs like Roy Krzywosinski admit that signing agreements like Wheatstone was a mistake, which they would not have made had they been operating in the US. And of course, these mistakes, along with the actions of the federal government and the unions, mean the nation will suffer. That's the end of the quote. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's against this background that we meet today for this exciting conference. It's a challenge to speakers and delegates to tackle this mammoth task of compiling a list of urgent action requirements to get Australia back into business. And it's my pleasure to be your chairman on day one, and I hope the chairman for day 2 and day 3 will be able to conclude and compile a very constructive work action list for us all. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to bring on our first speaker, who is Gina Reinhardt, well known to all of you. Now, the details of the speakers are detailed in your package, quite lengthy, and there's a lot of detail in them, so I'll leave it to you to absorb them. But this is a DVD presentation, and that will be concluded by Professor Ian Plimer, who is a director of the Roy Hill organisation, who will conclude with some first-hand comments. So I'll step down now and over to Dylan for the DVD. Thank you.